There is a room on the second floor of a building on Trad Street in Charleston, South Carolina, that people have been trying to explain for more than 200 years. The building is a real estate office now. Before that, it was a law firm. Before that, briefly, a photography studio. Before that, a succession of boarding houses and counting rooms and private clubs that came and went as Charleston changed around them, growing taller and paler and more deliberately beautiful with every generation. Before all of those things, it was a tavern. A smoke-stained, rum-soaked, plank-floored tavern in which men gathered on Thursday nights to gamble. The room on the second floor has a corner. That corner troubles people in a way no one has ever been entirely able to articulate. Painters have mentioned it. Tenants have moved their desks away from it. A woman who worked in the building in the 1990s told a local historian, in the careful voice of someone who does not want to sound foolish, that she had developed, over 4 years of working near that corner, a persistent feeling of being watched from it. Not threateningly, she said, but with the focused, intelligent attention of someone who has been standing in that spot for a very long time and has learned to see everything that happens in the room. The local historian wrote it down. Then he went looking for what had happened in that room. What he found was the story of Dinah. He found her in a baptismal record at St. Philip's Church dated November of 1748, where she appeared under the name she had chosen for herself upon her freedom, Dinah Fortune. He found her in the account books of a merchant named Nathaniel Barnwell. He found her in a deed of land purchase dated 1753, and he found her in the most extraordinary document of all, in a record of manumission signed by a woman she had purchased and freed, a young woman named Celia, in the year 1761. But none of those records told him what had happened to make Dinah Fortune's name appear in any of them. For that, he had to go further back, to a single night in August of 1748, to a room where the floorboards were stained with 100 years of spilled spirits, to a smoke-colored corner in which a woman stood so still she might have been a piece of furniture, to the night Dinah played cards for her own freedom, and lost, and won anyway. Sit down with me for a moment, if you will, before we go any further. Turn down the light if you have one to turn down, because this is an old Charlestown story, and old Charlestown stories are never quite what they appear to be. They are always, at the bottom of them, about the same thing, about what a person becomes when the world has decided, before they were born, exactly what they are. About what that person does in the small hours of the night with the self that the world refuses to see. Her name was Dinah. She had another name before that, a name her mother gave her in a village along a river on the other side of the ocean, a name that was never written down in any Carolina ledger because no Carolina ledger was interested in preserving it. That name is gone now. It went into the Atlantic with the ship that carried her, or it went into the dock at Gadsden's Wharf on the day she was sold, or it went into the slow erosion of years in a household where no one ever asked her what she had been called before she became what she was. But she carried the shape of that name inside her. She carried it the way women carry things they are not permitted to put down, invisibly, silently, in a space no one else could find or take from her. And when she finally named herself on a November morning in 1748 in a church on Meeting Street, she chose a name that carried within it the whole story of what she had done to earn the right to choose it. Fortune. Not luck, not accident. Fortune, in the old sense, the sense that people used in 1748 when they wanted to name the strange, deliberate intersection of preparation and chance that turns the ordinary world upside down for one person in one room on one improbable night. This is how she earned it. To understand what Dinah did on the night of August the 12th, 1748, you must first understand the city that made it possible, and that simultaneously made it unthinkable. In 1748, Charlestown was one of the richest cities in British North America. It was also one of the most frightened. The Stono Rebellion had happened only 9 years before, 20 miles southwest, when a group of enslaved men and women had risen up on a September morning with the word liberty on their lips and walked south toward Spanish Florida through a countryside of burning plantations and dead planters, and had been stopped only by the full armed force of the colony and the particular cruelty of what came after. The city had responded the way slave cities always respond to the thing they are most afraid of. It had built taller walls, new laws, tighter codes, slave patrols that moved through the streets at night like weather. But here is the thing about walls built in terror. The people they are meant to contain learn them better than the people who build them. By 1748, Charlestown had become a city of negotiations dressed as orders. Enslaved people worked the docks and the kitchens and the stables and the laundries and the drawing rooms. They moved through the streets with permits and without them. They carried messages and overheard conversations and learned, in the particular, practiced way of people who are never supposed to be listening, which white men owed money to which other white men, and which of those debts had grown large enough to make the debtors dangerous. They learned which households were kind and which were not. They learned which laws bent and which did not. They learned, in the small hours of the night, how to play cards. Because gambling was not only a white man's vice in colonial South Carolina. It was a language, a mathematics of chance, a way of turning the random cruelty of the world into something that could, for a few minutes at least, be outguessed. Dinah had been learning that language for 11 years. Not from a teacher, not from a book. She had been born in a village along a river she did not name for anyone in Carolina, in a place where games of chance were played with carved seeds and smooth stones, where elders read patterns in dust and smoke, where a child learned before she could walk that the world was not fair, but that it could sometimes, by patient observation, be anticipated. She had carried that knowledge across the ocean the way she had carried everything else that mattered, inside herself, invisible, tucked into the space where the world could not search. And she had spent 11 years standing in the corner of a smoke-stained room on Trad Street, watching Edward Blackwood play cards. Edward Blackwood was not born a ruined man. That is important, and it is one of the harder things to hold on to as this story moves towards its end, because by the time we reach the night that matters, he has become so thoroughly the shape of his own ruin that it is difficult to remember he was ever anything else. He was 42 years old in the summer of 1748. He was the heir to a rice plantation on the Ashley River that his father had carved out of cypress swamp and the labor of enslaved men and women. He had been educated in the manner of Carolina planters of his generation, enough Latin to make him feel educated, enough law to make him feel powerful, enough social grace to make him feel welcome in every room he entered. He had a son he did not know how to talk to, and a wife he had buried 5 years before, and a habit that had been with him longer than either the son or the wife. He could not stop playing cards. Not all at once, his ruin. That is almost never how it works. Ruin comes in small installments. A hand here, a debt there, A mortgage signed on a Tuesday when the rice crop looked certain and the note seemed like nothing at all. A second mortgage signed on a Thursday when the crop turned out not to be certain, and the note had grown into something heavier, and still it seemed manageable. A horse, a tract of swamp, a woman's future. Dinah had been in Blackwood's household for 11 years. She had started as a kitchen maid, been moved to the house as a housemaid, been moved again to the management of his linens and his wine and his wardrobe until she had become, without anyone deciding it, without anyone acknowledging it, the person who kept the household alive while its owner systematically destroyed everything else. She woke before he did. She went to sleep after he did. She knew the name of every man he owed money to and the approximate size of every debt. She knew this, not because anyone told her, but because she stood in his corner at his card tables and she listened with the attentiveness of a person who understands that information is the only currency available to her, to every word spoken by every man in every smoke-filled room. She knew when Blackwood was bluffing by the way he pressed his left thumb against the edge of the table. She knew when he was frightened by the small pulse visible in his throat. She knew which of his opponents counted cards and which of them counted only their losses. She knew which of them would fold under pressure and which would raise into nothing. She knew, in short, how to read the game, not just the cards, the men. And she knew, because she had watched it happen 3 times in 4 years, that when Edward Blackwood lost badly enough, he would push back from the table and say, in a voice that tried to sound careless, "I will cover that with Dinah." The first time, in the winter of 1744, he had lost her for a single night to a merchant named Cobb, who had sent her back the next morning with a note that called her lazy and did not mention the sound she had heard through the floorboards of his house that night. The sound that had made her press herself against the wall of the room they put her in and stay there until dawn without sleeping. The second time, in the spring of 1746, he had lost her for a week to a planter named Rutledge, whose wife had wept quietly over the dinner dishes on the third evening and then pressed 3 silver shillings into Dinah's palm on the last morning, not looking at her while she did it, not speaking, just pressing the coins into her hand with both of hers and holding them there for a moment that neither woman would ever forget. The third time, in the autumn of 1747, a naval officer named Bird had kept her for a month, during which she had served at a dinner party where she heard men in the hallway discussing the price of rice and the price of people in the same breath and in the same tone of voice. She had stood in the hallway with a tray in her hands and her face arranged into the blankness she had spent 11 years perfecting. And she had listened, and she had stored everything she heard in the small dark room inside herself where she stored everything that mattered. Each time, Blackwood had won her back, not because he was a better player than the men he played against, not because he loved her in any sense that word could be stretched to cover what existed between an enslaved woman and the man who owned her, but because losing her permanently would have meant admitting, in front of the men whose respect he could not afford to lose, that he had gambled away a valuable piece of property. And Edward Blackwood was not yet ready to admit the shape of his own ruin. But by the summer of 1748, the shape of it was becoming very clear. There was one man at those card tables on Trad Street who had been watching something other than the cards. His name was Cornelius Ashford. He was 56 years old. He was, by every measure that mattered in Charlestown in 1748, one of the most powerful men in the colony. He owned ships. He owned wharves. He owned warehouses and mortgages and the outstanding notes of men who did not yet know how thoroughly their futures belonged to him. He owned 230 enslaved people spread across 4 plantations, and he managed them with the same cold, patient efficiency with which he managed everything else. He did not gamble for excitement. He gambled the way certain men hunt, not because the outcome is uncertain, but because the process of narrowing the uncertainty is, in itself, satisfying. He was a patient man. He could sit at a table for 6 hours without speaking and without becoming visibly impatient, which gave him an enormous advantage over men like Edward Blackwood, who could not sit still for 20 minutes without beginning to sweat. Ashford had been watching Blackwood destroy himself for more than a year. He had lent him money. He had accepted his notes. He had accepted, on 2 separate occasions, Dinah as temporary collateral when Blackwood's losses outran his cash, and on each of those occasions, Ashford had looked at Dinah, not in the way that certain men looked at enslaved women, which Dinah recognized and knew how to deflect, but in the way that a man of business looks at a piece of property whose value he suspects is higher than the price currently on it. He saw, when he looked at her, a mind. He did not know yet how sharp that mind was. He knew only that she answered in a voice that gave nothing away, that she filled glasses without spilling, that her eyes moved across a card table the way a ledger clerk's eyes move across a column of figures, seeing everything, recording everything, reacting to nothing. He found it interesting. He found it, in a way he did not examine closely, slightly unsettling. Because Cornelius Ashford, in all his years of looking at people as inventory, had not often encountered a piece of inventory that looked back. By the first week of August, 1748, Blackwood had signed over the mortgage on 200 acres of his best rice land. He had signed a note for £800 sterling that he could not pay. He had wagered and lost his finest riding horse. And Ashford, who had been assembling this situation piece by piece for more than a year with the patience of a man building something complicated, had decided that the night of August the 12th was the night he would finish it. He did not know, when he sat down at the table on Trad Street that Thursday evening, that the woman standing in the corner had been watching him as carefully as he had been watching her. That she had memorized the slight relaxation of his shoulders when his cards were strong, and the small adjustment he made to his cuffs when they were not. That she had been carrying, inside the small dark room of herself, a map of him as precise as the map she carried of Blackwood. He did not know any of that. He thought she was furniture. The air over Charlestown that August was thick with heat and salt and the particular heaviness that settles over a river city at the end of summer, when the tide is wrong and the water is low, and everything smells faintly of what has been left behind. The tavern on Trad Street was, by midnight, full of the smoke of pipes and the residue of wagers made and lost, and the particular silence that settles over a card table when the money has gone long past comfortable into something that will take months to undo. There were 12 men in that room, possibly 14. Planters, merchants, factors, the younger sons of older fortunes. Dinah knew most of their names. She knew more about their private finances than their own wives did. She had been standing in the corner of rooms like this one for 11 years, and in that time she had learned that the men who sat at these tables shared one trait that transcended their individual differences. They never looked at the corner. The corner was where the help stood, and the help was not supposed to be paying attention. She was paying attention. She had been paying attention since the moment Blackwood sat down, because there was something in the set of his shoulders tonight that she recognized. A tightness. A way of holding himself too still that meant, in the private language she had spent 11 years learning to read, that he had already lost in his mind before the first card was dealt. She watched Ashford across the table. His shoulders were loose. His hands were quiet on the felt. He had the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he intended to be. She watched the play move through its stages, the early, cautious hands, the gradual escalation, the point at which two of the other players stood back and it became, as it always eventually became, a matter between Blackwood and Ashford. She watched the pile in the center of the table grow. She watched Blackwood's throat. The pulse. She had first noticed it in the winter of 1744, a small, rapid movement in the left side of his neck, visible just above his collar, that appeared only when he was frightened. It was there now. Had been there for the last 3 hands. Then Blackwood pushed back from the table and said, in the voice she had heard 3 times before and had hoped, without permitting herself to believe it, she would never hear again, "I will cover the 40 pounds with Dinah." He did not look at her when he said it. This was the part that would stay with her, not the words. She had heard the words before, and she had understood each time she heard them that this was what she was. A figure in a ledger, a number in a column, something that could be moved across a table like a coin. She had made her peace with this fact, or something that resembled peace, in the same way that people make peace with the things they cannot change. But he did not look at her. Edward Blackwood, who had known her for 11 years, who had eaten bread she baked and worn shirts she mended and slept under blankets she had washed and pressed in the cold mornings before dawn, who had put her on a table twice before and won her back twice before, and who could not, on this night, manage to turn his head toward the corner where she stood and acknowledge, even by a glance, that the thing he was placing at the center of the table was a person who had been standing 3 feet behind his chair for 11 years. He said her name to the room. He did not say it to her. And in the corner, Dinah felt something shift. Not fear. She was past fear in the way that people who have been afraid for very long periods of time sometimes arrive, without meaning to, at a place on the other side of it. Not anger, exactly. Anger was a thing she had learned to ration, to save for the moments when it could be used rather than the moments when it would only cost her. What she felt in that corner on Trad Street was something colder and clearer than either of those things. She felt the full weight of 11 years. Every hand she had watched, every debt she had memorized, every tell she had catalogued, every opponent's weakness she had mapped, every night she had stood in a corner while men decided her future without consulting her. 11 years of that, arriving all at once, settling into her like iron cooling in a forge. She looked at Blackwood's hand, face up on the table from where she stood. 2 of hearts, 5 of hearts, 7 of clubs, 7 of diamonds, Jack of spades, a pair of 7s. She had seen it. She had seen Ashford's face when he looked at his own cards, and she had seen the almost invisible ease that moved through his body in the moment after he looked at them. Ashford had 3 of something, maybe more. Blackwood was going to lose. And when Blackwood lost tonight, Dinah understood, with the certainty of a woman who has been listening carefully for 11 years, that he would not win her back. There would be no next game. There would be no next game. There would no next game. There would be no desperate final hand. Ashford would take his winnings, and then Ashford would take the land, and then there would be no more Edward Blackwood in any room that mattered. And Dinah would belong to Cornelius Ashford. She would be sent to a plantation on the Santee, or sold to a man in Barbados, or moved quietly into the machinery of Ashford's household, into a life as controlled and as airless as a room with no windows, in the care of a man who looked at her and saw a mind and had decided in the way of powerful men who identify something they find interesting, that he would prefer to own it. Unless... She stepped out of the corner. "Master Blackwood." Her voice was low. She had kept it low for 11 years, low and steady and calibrated to carry no farther than necessary. The voice of a servant, the voice of the invisible. But it crossed the room in the silence that had settled after the wager, and every man at the table turned to look at her. And in the looking, she understood that she had already done the most dangerous thing. She was visible. She had made herself visible. There was no return from that. Blackwood looked up at her as though he had genuinely forgotten she was there. She kept her eyes on him. She did not look at Ashford. She had learned, in 11 years of watching men negotiate, that there were 2 ways to ask for something from a man who holds power over you: as a demand, which would be crushed before it left your mouth, and as a favor, which gave the man the pleasure of feeling generous while giving him what he actually wanted. What Edward Blackwood wanted in this moment, more than anything else in the room, was a way out that let him keep his dignity. She was going to offer him one. "You have wagered me," she said. "I know it. These gentlemen know it. I am not asking you to take it back. I am asking you, before the hand is finished, to let me play it for myself." The silence that followed was of the particular quality that exists only when a room full of people encounters something outside their categories. Not scandalous, exactly. Not threatening, exactly. Simply outside every expectation. A thing that had no name yet in the language of the room. Then one of the younger planters laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the kind that fills a silence when a silence has become too wide. No one joined him. Cornelius Ashford was not laughing. Cornelius Ashford was looking at Dinah with the careful, assessing attention of a man who has just been shown something unexpected and has not yet decided what it is worth. He set his cards face down on the table. He folded his hands on top of them. "Your servant has a proposal," he said. Not to Blackwood, to the room. Blackwood's color was rising. "She has no... This is not her place. She will go back to the corner." "What is your proposal, Dinah?" Ashford said. Still not to Blackwood, to her. And for the first time that evening, he used her name. Not the girl, not your woman. Her name, spoken in a room where her name had not been spoken directly by anyone with authority since the evening began. She felt it land. She did not show that she felt it. "Master Blackwood has wagered me against his debt," she said. "If I play in his place, one hand, the same stakes, and I win, the debt is cleared and I stay with Master Blackwood. If I lose..." She paused for exactly the length of a breath. "I ask that my freedom be the price, that I belong to no one." The room erupted. Not in shouting. Charlestown drawing rooms did not shout, even in the rooms above taverns, but in the overlapping voices of men who have just witnessed something they will be dining out on for years, while simultaneously needing to establish for each other that they find it absurd. "A slave cannot make a legal wager. Blackwood, for God's sake, control her. This is not. There is no precedent." "Gentlemen," Ashford said at once, quietly. The room stopped. "Sit down," he said. They sat. He looked at Blackwood. "Your servant has offered to play one hand for double stakes. If she wins, your debt is cleared and she stays with you. If she loses, she claims her freedom. which would mean she does not come to me. From where I am sitting, that is no worse than the current arrangement, which gives her to me regardless." He picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking from it. "The question before us, Blackwood, is not whether she has the right to make this offer. She has already made it. The question is whether you have the nerve to let her try." It was, Dinah understood, a cruel thing to say. Ashford knew it was cruel when he said it. He was not helping her out of kindness. He was helping her because the most powerful man in Charlestown was bored, and a woman playing cards for her freedom was the most interesting thing that had happened in any room he had sat in for a long time. She did not care why he helped her. She cared only that he did. Blackwood looked at his cards. He looked at Ashford. He looked, finally, at Dinah. Truly looked at her, for what may have been the first time in years. And she saw in his face the precise shape of a man who has run out of everything except the chance that is being offered to him by the person he has treated as collateral. He was not a good man. She had known this for 11 years. He was a frightened, hollow man who had confused the accident of his birth with personal worth, and had been losing the argument with that confusion quietly for decades. He was not going to change tonight. He was not going to be saved by her or by Ashford or by the grace of a God she was not certain had been paying attention. But he was going to let her sit down. "Sit down," he said to her. Not gently, not unkindly, simply empty, the way a room sounds empty when the last person has left it. "Sit down and play." Dinah walked to the table. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She moved the way she moved when she carried a tray of glasses, with the particular steady deliberation of a person who understands that one wrong motion in a room paying this quality of attention could destroy the thing she was trying to build. Blackwood stood, his chair scraped against the floorboards. He stepped back, and Dinah sat down in his place, and the room tilted. She did not let herself feel the tilting. She noted it and set it aside, the way she had set aside everything else she could not afford to feel in 11 years of corners and card tables and the voice of a man saying, in the voice of someone announcing the weather, "I will cover that with Dinah." She looked at the hand, the pair of sevens, the jack, the low cards of the wrong suit. She looked up at Cornelius Ashford. And she understood in that moment exactly what the next few minutes were going to cost her, and exactly what she was going to do with the cost. She was not going to win with these cards. She had known it before she sat down. She had known it from the corner, from the way Ashford's body had settled when he looked at his hand, from the small private satisfaction at the corner of his mouth that a less careful observer would have missed entirely. He had something strong. A pair of sevens was not strong enough. But she was not going to fold. She had thought in the 11 years of her education in this corner that the game was about the cards. She had learned more recently that it was not. The cards were the excuse the game gave itself. The game was actually about something else. It was about the appearance of certainty. It was about making the man across the table believe that you already knew the outcome and were simply waiting for the world to catch up. There was one way to create that appearance with a bad hand, and it was not bluffing in the way that Blackwood bluffed, with shaking hands and a voice that thinned when it was supposed to be confident. That kind of bluff was a display of fear dressed as courage, and it never worked on anyone who had been paying attention. The way to do it was stillness. She laid her hands flat on either side of the cards. She looked at Ashford and she waited. Not tensely, not with the performed calm of a person who is frightened of being seen to be frightened, with the actual stillness of a woman who has made her decision and is now on the other side of it, in the place where there is nothing left to do but see what happens. Ashford looked at her for a long moment. "Your wager stands at £40, he said. "Or rather, at your freedom. I will raise £100. He pushed a leather purse into the center of the table. "If you wish to match it, your freedom must be worth at least that much to these gentlemen." It was a test. She understood it as a test. He was not trying to win more money. He had more money than he could spend. He was trying to see whether she would fold under pressure, whether the thing he had identified in her from the corner, the mind, the steadiness, the quality of someone who was not what they appeared, was real, or whether it was only the appearance of a thing and not the thing itself. She matched it. "I match your £100 with my labor, my skill, and my life. If these gentlemen will accept my word that my freedom is worth more than £100, and I believe they will, since it is the only thing any of us in this room would not sell for any amount, then the wager stands." One of the planters started to object. Ashford did not let him finish. "The wager stands," he said. "Show your cards." Dinah looked down at the pair of sevens. Here is what she felt in that moment, which she would not write about until many years later, and then only in the small green notebook she kept beside her bed. She felt the full weight of what it meant to have walked out of a corner and sat down at a table and demanded to be played against as though she were a person. Not the fear of losing. She had accepted that she might lose before she stood up. Not hope, exactly, which was too thin a thing for what she was carrying. Something heavier than both of those. The weight of 11 years of watching, arriving at this one moment, asking to be spent. She laid the cards on the table. 2 of hearts, 5 of hearts, 7 of clubs, 7 of diamonds, Jack of spades. The room leaned forward. Ashford looked at her hand. He looked at his own cards for a long moment. Began slowly to smile. "A pair of sevens," he said. "A brave hand, Dinah, but not a winning hand." He turned his cards over. 3 kings. The room let out its breath. That long collective exhale of people who have been watching someone risk everything and want, secretly and shamefully, to see them fall. Blackwood made a sound. Dinah did not turn to look at him. She sat very still, her hands still flat on the table, and she looked at 3 kings arranged in a row by a man who had been patient for a very long time. And she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not despair. She had been prepared for despair. She felt calm. She stood up. "I am ready, Mr. Ashford," she said. That was all. 2 words. The words of a woman who had walked into a game knowing she might lose and had played it anyway, and who was now prepared to pay the price without ceremony, because she had decided, somewhere between the corner and the chair, that the act of sitting down was itself something that could not be taken back regardless of the outcome. She had sat at the table. She had played. Whatever came next, those 2 things were true, and would remain true, and could not be undone by 3 kings or by anything else. Ashford looked at her standing across the table, and his smile faded. He stared at her for a long time. Not the assessing stare with which he had been watching her all evening. Something different. something that looked, in the inadequate candlelight of that room, almost like discomfort. Almost like a man encountering for the first time the edge of his own categories. He looked at the woman who had just lost a card game for her freedom and said, without a tremble and without a plea, that she was ready. Then he reached into the purse he had pushed into the center of the table. He took out a single gold coin. He held it up in the candlelight. "Do you know what this is?" "A guinea, sir." "A guinea. Do you know how many of these your master owes me?" "No, sir." "Neither does he." He turned the coin between his fingers. "Your master owes me more than his plantation is worth. He owes me a sum that will take him the rest of his life to repay, and he will not repay it, because he does not know how to stop playing cards." She said nothing. "I could take you tonight," Ashford continued. He said it plainly, as a statement of fact. "I could send you to my plantation on the Santee. I could sell you to a man in Barbados. I could do any of these things, and the law of this colony would say I was within my rights." She said nothing. He set the guinea down on the table with a small, precise sound. And then he was quiet for a long moment, and in the quiet, every man in the room was very still, because they understood that whatever was happening was no longer about the cards. "Here is what interests me, Dinah," Ashford said. "In 11 years of standing in a corner, you learned to play this game better than the man who sat at the table. You walked across this room and asked for something that has never been asked in this room in my memory. And when you lost, you stood up and said you were ready. Not in resignation, and not in performance, but the way a person says a thing that is simply true." He pushed the entire pot, the 40 pounds, the notes, the purse, everything, back across the table. Not to Dinah, to Blackwood. Blackwood stared at it. "What?" "Take it. Your debts, your notes, your property, all of it." Ashford's voice had gone back to the voice he used for closing transactions. Precise, final, the voice of a man recording a figure. "I am canceling everything you owe me. The plantation mortgage, the personal notes, the horse, the 40 pounds. All of it. Tonight." "Why?" Ashford looked at Blackwood with an expression that contained, very briefly, something close to contempt. "Because the most valuable thing I could take from you tonight is not your land, and not your slave. It is the experience of understanding for the rest of your life that you were saved by the woman you treated as collateral." He stood. He looked at Dinah. "I will not take you. You asked for your freedom if you lost. You lost. But I did not come to this table to win small." He picked up his hat from the back of his chair. He did not look again at Blackwood. "Edward Blackwood, you will free this woman. Tomorrow, before witnesses, in proper legal form. You will give her papers. You will give her a certificate of her freedom." He moved toward the door. "And you will never again wager a human being at a card table. Not because the law forbids it. The law, as we all know, does not forbid it adequately. But because I do." Then Cornelius Ashford walked out of the tavern on Trad Street and did not look back. The room was quiet for a very long time after the sound of his footsteps on the stairs had faded. Dinah stood at the table. She did not speak. She was thinking about the corner, about what the corner looked like from the table now that she was on this side of it, about how different it was, and how exactly the same. Then she turned, and she walked back to the corner, and she stood there, one last time, with her hands folded in front of her, not because it was her place, but because she had learned in 11 years to finish things properly. And Edward Blackwood, sitting at the empty table with his winnings in front of him and his ruin temporarily canceled, and his freedom to continue destroying himself, returned to him in full. Edward Blackwood, who had not looked at her when he put her on the table, looked at her now. He looked at her for a long time. She did not help him find any words, because she did not have any to offer, and because it was not her responsibility to make this easier for him. She looked back at him the way Ashford had looked at his 3 kings, quietly, without expression, waiting for the world to catch up. Then she picked up the tray from the table by the door because it was there and she was trained to carry it, and she walked out of the room. The sun rose over Charlestown on the morning of Friday, August the 13th, 1748, the way it always rose, slow, golden, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath it. Dinah did not sleep. She sat in the room above the kitchen in Blackwood's house on the Ashley River, on the edge of the narrow bed she had slept in for 11 years, and she waited for morning. Not with anxiety, with the patient, specific waiting of a woman who has done the hardest thing and is now simply allowing time to do the rest. Blackwood sent for a clerk at 9 o'clock. The man arrived with a leather satchel and the careful expression of a professional who has learned, in his line of work, that the reasons behind a document are rarely his business. He spread his papers on the dining room table. He uncapped his ink. He wrote, in the formal language of the colony, the document that Cornelius Ashford had ordered and that Edward Blackwood, reduced now to simply executing instructions, had not resisted. Know all men by these presents that I, Edward Blackwood of St. Philip's Parish, planter, for divers good causes and considerations me thereunto moving, have manumitted, enfranchised, set free, and discharged from all manner of bondage or servitude my Negro woman-slave named Dinah, aged about 30 years, to all intents, constructions, and purposes whatsoever, as fully, largely, and amply as if she had been born free. Dinah watched the quill move across the paper. She had not been permitted to learn to read. That would come later, that skill, the way many things came later. But she could see the shape of the letters on the page, and she had watched white men read documents at enough tables to understand, from the care the clerk was taking, from the way he paused before certain phrases and wrote them with particular precision, that this was a document that mattered. When the wax seal was pressed into the bottom corner, she heard the sound it made. A small, specific sound, nothing dramatic, just the soft impression of a seal in warm wax. And something in her chest released that had been held for so long she had forgotten it was being held. Blackwood signed his name with a hand that still trembled slightly from the night before. The clerk handed the paper to Dinah. She held it. She held it the way you hold a thing you have been moving toward for a very long time without permitting yourself to believe you would ever reach it. Carefully, with both hands, conscious of its weight. It was not safety, she knew this. A paper did not make a person safe in a city where free black people were arrested on suspicion of being runaways, where freedom papers were torn by men who did not like the look of the person carrying them. She knew all of that. She had heard all of that in the corners of rooms for 11 years. but the paper was hers. It had her name on it. It said she was free. And it had been won, not by the three kings, not by the generosity of a powerful man, but by the act of a woman standing up from a corner and walking across a room and sitting down at a table and saying, in a voice that did not shake, "I will play for myself." Blackwood looked at her after the clerk had gone. "I do not know what to say to you," he said. "You don't need to say anything, master," Dinah replied. "I am not your master." "No," she said, "you are not." She turned and she walked out of the house on the Ashley River, and she did not look back. She appeared in the records of St. Philip's Church 3 months later, in November of 1748, where she was baptized as a free woman under the name she had chosen, Dinah Fortune. She appeared in 1750 in the account books of Nathaniel Barnwell, a merchant who paid her wages for keeping his house. She appeared in 1753 as the buyer of a small lot near the corner of Broad and Meeting Streets, 20 feet across, not much more, but land that belonged to her, registered in her name in the Charleston deed books where anyone could read it. And she appeared in 1761 in the document she signed herself, in the slow, careful hand of a woman who had taught herself to write in the years after her freedom. The manumission of a young woman named Celia, whom Dinah had purchased and freed. I want you to stop on that last document, because it is the one that tells you who Dinah Fortune actually was. She had been sold. She had been wagered. She had been carried from room to room and ledger to ledger for 11 years, and then, for one night, she had played for her freedom and lost, and received it anyway from a man whose motives were not pure and who did not pretend they were. She could have taken her wages and her small lot and lived out her years quietly, grateful for the extraordinary accident of a powerful man's boredom. Instead, she bought Celia and freed her, the way someone had once freed her. Not in the same way, not by the same means, not from the same position of power. Dinah Fortune was a free black woman in 1761 Charleston, which meant she held her freedom by a thread of paper and the tolerance of the men around her. And spending her savings to purchase and free another woman was a financial decision she could not easily afford. She made it anyway. The deed of manumission she signed is preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society. Celia's name is written in Dinah's hand, in ink that has faded to the color of old tea, on a page that has been folded and unfolded enough times that the paper is worn thin along the creases. Someone handled this document repeatedly, kept returning to it. The archivist who catalogued it in the 1970s noted in her records that the paper showed evidence of repeated careful handling over an extended period. Dinah Fortune held that document the way she had once held her own freedom paper, with both hands, conscious of its weight. Edward Blackwood did not gamble again in any room where the story of August the 12th, 1748 was known, which meant that within a few months he had run out of rooms. He sold the plantation on the Ashley River in 1754 and moved to a smaller house in the back country. He died in 1760 at the age of 54, alone. The inventory of his estate listed no enslaved people, which may mean he had freed them, or may mean he had lost them in other ways, or may mean simply that by the end of his life, the machinery of ruin had done the work that any observer of his habits had long predicted it would do. He did not appear in any room with Dinah Fortune again. Whether he ever thought about the night of August the 12th is not recorded. Whether he understood, in the years that followed, what had actually happened in that room, what Dinah had risked, and what her calm in defeat had meant, and what Ashford's decision had actually said about the three of them, is not recorded. It is possible that he thought about it every Thursday for the rest of his life. It is possible that he did not think about it at all. Cornelius Ashford lived another 20 years. He never mentioned the night in the tavern on Trad Street in any surviving letter or ledger. He conducted his business with the same cold efficiency that had made him wealthy, and that kept him wealthy in the decades after the night he had decided not to win small. He married, briefly, a woman from Georgetown who died in childbed. He did not remarry. He continued to sit at card tables, but he did not, by any account that survives, wager human beings again. His will, probated in 1768, included among its bequests an item that his executors apparently found puzzling enough to note. £50 to be given annually to any free woman of color in the city of Charleston who shall demonstrate skill in letters or arithmetic, to be selected by my executors at their discretion, in perpetuity, or until the funds are exhausted. No explanation was given for the bequest. None of the documents in the Ashford papers that survive explain it. His attorney, in a letter to a business partner written shortly after the will was probated, mentioned it only in passing, as one of the unusual provisions of a will that was otherwise entirely conventional. Whether that bequest was his private monument to Dinah Fortune, to the woman who had sat across a table from him with a pair of sevens and looked at him as though the outcome had already been decided, no record says. It is not impossible to imagine. Dinah Fortune died in 1778 at the age of about 60. She died free, in the house, on her own small lot near Broad and Meeting Streets, with the manumission paper framed on the wall beside her bed and a deck of worn playing cards in the drawer beneath it. Whether the cards were the same deck from the tavern on Trad Street, whether she had taken them or bought them or simply kept her own set from the years of teaching herself the game in the kitchen by candlelight, is not known. Her grave is lost. The lot on Broad Street was sold years after her death, and the house was torn down, and the city grew over her memory the way cities have always grown over the memories of women who did not have monuments. But she left Celia, and Celia left children. And there is a line, thin and nearly invisible in the historical record, that runs from the manumission paper Dinah Fortune signed in 1761 forward into the next century and the one after that. A line of women who were free because Dinah had decided that what had been done for her should be done by her. And there is the room on the second floor of the building on Trad Street. The corner troubles people. They move their desks away from it. They feel, in that corner, the focused, intelligent attention of someone who has been standing there for a very long time and has learned to see everything that happens in the room. The local historian who first pieced together Dinah Fortune's story spent an afternoon in that room, reading through the documents he had assembled. He said afterward that it was the most uncomfortable afternoon he had ever spent reading history, not because the material was disturbing, though it was, but because of the persistent feeling that the material was reading him back. That something in the corner of that room was paying the same quality of attention that Dinah Fortune had paid to every card table she ever stood behind. Watching, recording, waiting for the moment to step out of the corner. He sat in that room until the light began to fail, and then he packed up his papers and he left. And at the door he stopped and turned back to look at the corner. It was empty. It has always been empty, in the sense that corners are empty. But it does not feel empty. It has not felt empty for more than 270 years. In the drawer beside her bed, Dinah Fortune kept two things: the worn deck of playing cards, and, beneath it, a single piece of paper. Not the manumission paper, that was on the wall. This was a different paper, smaller, written in her own hand, in the slow, careful letters of a woman who taught herself to write in her 30s and never lost the precision that comes from learning a thing late and taking it seriously. No one knows exactly what it said. It was not preserved. When the house on the lot near Broad and Meeting Streets was cleared after Dinah's death, the drawer was emptied, and the person who emptied it, a neighbor by one account, did not know who Dinah Fortune was, or what she had done, or what the piece of paper might have meant. It is gone. But in the notebooks of the local historian who found her story in 1978, there is a passage, near the end, in which he speculates about what it might have said. He had been reading Celia's manumission paper, the one Dinah had signed, the one that showed evidence of repeated careful handling. And he had been thinking about a woman who spent 11 years in the corner of a room watching men play cards, and who sat down at the table one night with a pair of sevens and lost, and who walked out of that room free anyway. He wrote, "I have been sitting here for an hour trying to think of how a woman like that would describe herself in a small piece of paper she kept in a drawer beside her bed. I keep coming back to the same idea. I think she would have written something about what she was. Not what she had been, not the village, not the ship, not the sail block, not the corner. What she was. What she had made herself into in 11 years of watching and learning and waiting for the right moment. I think she would have written, 'I was here the whole time. I was always here.'" Say her name out loud, just once, before you close this video. Dinah Fortune, a woman who was born across an ocean and sold on a wharf in Charlestown and used as a stake at a card table, and who still, somehow, in the face of all of it, found the courage to stand up from a corner and ask for the chance to play for herself. She lost the hand. She won the table. I want to ask you something before you go. Has there been a corner in your life? A room where no one thought to watch you, where you stood long enough and quietly enough and carefully enough that you came to know everything happening at the table while the people at it forgot you were there? Tell me. Because Dinah Fortune stood in corners for 11 years, and when she finally stepped out, the room went quiet. If this story has settled into some room inside you, the way old Charlestown stories do, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because someone you love needs to know that a woman once sat down at a card table with a pair of sevens and looked across at 3 kings and did not flinch. And if you want to keep walking with me through the forgotten rooms of history, the corners and the drawers and the small pieces of paper that almost didn't survive, stay. Subscribe. Turn on the bell. There are so many more names in the dark. We are not done speaking them.